Jake Morrison floated through the main corridor of Kepler Research Station, his magnetic boots clicking softly against the metal floor. The huge space station spun slowly in orbit around a distant planet, creating artificial gravity that kept everyone from floating around like lost socks. Jake had been living here for 8 months now, and he still loved the view of the stars through the big viewing windows. The station was home to 4 different species, and Jake's job was to make sure they all got along. This wasn't always easy, since each group was as different from humans as night was from day. Jake pushed off from a wall and glided toward the Zephyrian section, where his first meeting of the day waited. The door to the Zephyrian area slid open with a soft hiss, and Jake immediately felt the temperature drop. The air became crisp and cold, just the way the crystal beings liked it. Nexus 7 stood near a control panel, his body looking like a living piece of blue-green glass. Light moved through his transparent form in slow waves, which Jake had learned meant the alien was thinking hard about something. "Good morning, Nexus 7, Jake said, his breath forming small puffs in the cold air. "How are the gravitational readings coming along?" The crystal being turned toward Jake, and his inner light pulsed faster. "Human Jake Morrison, the data streams show unusual patterns in Sector 7. My calculations suggest we need more time to understand what we are seeing." Jake nodded and checked his tablet. The Zephyrians were incredible at math and science, but they took forever to make decisions. Their home planet was covered in crystal formations that grew over thousands of years, so they were used to thinking in very long time periods. Getting them to hurry was like trying to rush a mountain to move. "That's fine," Jake said. "Take all the time you need. Just let me know if you find anything dangerous." Nexus 7's lights dimmed slightly, which Jake knew meant the alien was pleased. "Your species shows wisdom and patience, human Jake Morrison." Many others rushed toward answers like water rushing toward a cliff. Jake smiled and headed back into the main corridor. The next stop was the Mallory section, and he could already smell the sharp chemical scents that the insect aliens used to talk to each other. The smell got stronger as he walked, like walking into a room full of cleaning supplies and spices. Mixed together, the Mallory section buzzed with activity. Dozens of 6-legged creatures, each about the size of a large dog, scurried back and forth carrying equipment and data tablets. Their shiny black shells reflected the overhead lights, and their forearms moved in perfect coordination. Klitsch, the group's speaker, approached Jake with quick tapping steps. "Human Jake Morrison arrives at the optimal time," Klitsch said, her voice making clicking sounds that the translation device turned into words. "The hive mind has discovered important information about the energy readings." Jake had learned that the Mallory never worked alone. Everything they did was decided by the group, and they could share thoughts through chemical signals that humans couldn't even smell. It made them amazing at working together, but sometimes they spent hours just deciding what to have for lunch. "What did you find?" Jake asked, watching as several other Mallory gathered around them in a loose circle. "The energy patterns match historical data from our archives," Klitsch explained, while the other Mallory released gentle puffs of sweet-smelling chemicals that Jake's translator said meant agreement. "Our ancestors encountered similar readings near unstable stellar formations. We suggest caution in all future observations." "Good work," Jake said. "I'll make sure the other teams know about your findings." The Mallory cluster made happy clicking sounds, and several of them touched Jake's arms gently with their small hands. This was their way of saying thank you, and Jake had gotten used to it over the months. At first, having giant insects pat his arms had been pretty weird, but now it felt normal. His last stop was the Vorthen section, and Jake always saved it for last because it was the most relaxing. The door opened to reveal a warm, humid environment, filled with the sound of gently moving water. The air was thick and moist, like being in a tropical rainforest after a rainstorm. Aquaren floated in a large tank of clear water, her smooth gray-green skin glistening under soft blue lights. The Vorthen looked like a cross between a dolphin and a person, with long arms that ended in webbed hands and large, dark eyes that seemed to see everything. When she saw Jake, she swam to the edge of her tank and lifted her head above the water. "Jake, my friend," she said, her voice making gentle bubbling sounds. "The ocean songs from the deep sensors are telling us new stories today." Jake pulled up a chair next to the tank. The Vorthen homeworld was covered in deep oceans, and they thought about everything in terms of water and flow. They were incredibly good at sensing changes and patterns like living storm predictors. "What kind of stories?" Jake asked, genuinely curious. The Vorthen had a poetic way of describing scientific data that often gave insights the other species missed. "The stellar currents are changing direction," Aquaren said, moving her hands through the water in flowing gestures. "Like when deep ocean streams shift before a great storm. Something large is moving in the far darkness, affecting the smaller currents around it." Jake made notes on his tablet. When Aquaren talked about currents and flows, she was usually describing gravitational forces and energy patterns. Her people had evolved to navigate vast underwater distances, so they were incredibly sensitive to environmental changes. "Should we be worried?" Jake asked. Aquaren dove underwater for a moment, then surfaced again. "Not worried, but prepared. The ocean teaches us that change brings both danger and opportunity. We must be ready to swim with the new currents when they arrive." Jake spent a few more minutes with Aquaren, enjoying the peaceful sound of water and her gentle wisdom. The Vorthen were the most relaxed of all the alien species, and talking with them always made Jake feel calmer as he walked back through the main corridor toward his own quarters. Jake thought about how amazing it was to work with such different kinds of intelligent life. Each species brought their own strengths to the research station. The Zephyrians were brilliant at mathematics and long-term planning. The Maulari were incredible at teamwork and data analysis. The Vorthen were experts at detecting patterns and changes, and humans were good at bringing everyone together and solving problems on the fly. Jake had noticed that when things went wrong or when the groups couldn't agree on something, they often looked to him for solutions. Not because humans were smarter, but because they seemed to be good at finding ways to make different approaches work together. The station's main computer chimed softly, announcing the end of the work shift. Jake looked out through one of the large viewing windows at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there were the homeworlds of his alien colleagues, each one a completely different environment that had shaped completely different kinds of life. But here on Kepler Research Station, they all worked together toward the same goals. They shared meals in the common area, adjusted the temperature and humidity to make everyone comfortable, and slowly learned to understand each other's ways of thinking. It wasn't always easy, but Jake thought it was probably the most important work anyone could do. He headed toward his quarters, looking forward to a hot shower and some sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new discoveries, and Jake wanted to be ready for whatever the universe decided to throw at them next. Living among the stars with alien friends was never boring, and Jake wouldn't trade this job for anything back on Earth. The morning started like any other day on Kepler Research Station. Jake Morrison was drinking his coffee in the main dining area when Commander Ellen Martinez walked in with a serious look on her face. She was a tall woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and when she looked that serious, it usually meant important news was coming. "Attention everyone," Commander Martinez called out, her voice carrying across the dining hall. The various alien crew members turned their attention toward her, along with the handful of humans scattered around the room. "I need to make an important announcement about station safety procedures." Jake noticed that Nexus 7 was sitting at a specially cooled table near the far wall, his crystal body glowing softly as he listened. 3 Maulari were clustered together at another table, their antennae twitching as they shared chemical signals about the commander's tone. Aquaren floated in a mobile water tank that allowed her to join group meetings, her large dark eyes fixed on the commander. "Galactic safety regulations require all joint species research facilities to conduct regular emergency drills," Commander Martinez continued. "We've been putting this off for months, but headquarters is insisting we complete our fire suppression drill within the next week." Jake felt his stomach drop a little. He had read the safety manuals when he first arrived at the station, and he remembered the section about fire drills. But as he looked around the room at his alien colleagues, he realized that none of them had probably thought much about fire. Emergency procedures. Commander Martinez pulled out her tablet and began reading from the official requirements. The drill will simulate a major fire in the main laboratory section. All crew members must follow evacuation routes to designated safety areas. The exercise will include simulated smoke, emergency lighting, and alarm systems to create realistic conditions. The reaction from the alien crew members was immediate and unsettling. Nexus 7's inner light began flickering rapidly, changing from its usual calm blue-green to a nervous yellow color. The three Mallories started releasing sharp chemical scents that made Jake's nose burn slightly. Aquaren dove underwater in her tank and stayed there, only the tips of her fingers visible above the surface. The drill will take place in 3 days, Commander Martinez said, apparently not noticing the growing distress among the aliens. All department heads should review evacuation procedures with their teams. Questions? One of the human engineers raised his hand and asked about backup power systems during the drill. A few other humans asked practical questions about timing and equipment shutdown procedures. But the aliens remained silent, their distress becoming more obvious by the minute. After the meeting ended, Jake stayed behind as the dining hall cleared. Out, he watched Nexus 7 move slowly toward the exit, his usually graceful gliding motion now jerky and uncertain. The crystal being's light was still flickering that nervous yellow color, and Jake could see stress fractures appearing along his arms where there had been smooth crystal before. Nexus 7, Jake called out gently. Are you feeling all right? The Zephyrian turned toward Jake, and his voice carried a trembling quality that Jake had never heard before. Human Jake Morrison, your species' planned fire exercise creates significant computational errors in my survival processing systems. Jake frowned, trying to translate that into simpler terms. You mean the fire drill is making you nervous? Nervous, Nexus 7 repeated as if testing the word. Yes, this human term describes the condition accurately. My people have no experience with combustion phenomena. Our world contains no fire. The concept of controlled burning for safety preparation does not process correctly in my understanding. Before Jake could respond, Nexus 7 glided away quickly, his light now pulsing in rapid, anxious patterns. Jake had never seen the usually calm aliens so disturbed by anything, not even when they had discovered those strange energy readings last month. Jake decided to check on the Mallory next. He found them in their work area, but instead of their usual organized efficiency, chaos filled the room. Equipment was scattered everywhere, and the chemical smells were so strong that Jake had to breathe through his mouth. Klitsch was trying to coordinate with her cluster mates, but their usual perfect synchronization was completely broken. Klitsch, Jake said carefully, not wanting to startle them further. Is everything okay in here? The Mallory speaker turned toward Jake, her forearms moving in agitated gestures. Human Jake Morrison, the hive mind experiences severe disruption when processing fire danger scenarios. Our genetic memory contains warnings of tunnel fires that destroyed entire colonies. Combustion in enclosed spaces equals extinction-level threat. 2 other Mallory nearby began making high-pitched chittering sounds that Jake's translator couldn't interpret. The chemical sense in the room became even stronger, creating a fog of panic signals that was making Jake dizzy. But it's just a drill, Jake said, trying to sound reassuring. No real fire. Just practice. Practice death scenario? Klitsch clicked back. Hive mind cannot separate simulation from reality when survival instincts activate. The chemical warning signals override logical thinking processes. Jake left the Mallory section feeling more worried than before. He made his way to the Vorthan area, hoping that Aquaren and her people might be handling the news better. But when the doors opened to their humid, water-filled environment, Jake immediately knew something was very wrong. The usual peaceful sound of gently flowing water had been replaced by agitated splashing and bubbling. Several Vorthan were swimming in frantic circles in the large community pool, while others had retreated to small individual tanks and sealed themselves inside. Aquaren was floating near the bottom of her tank, completely motionless except for the rapid movement of her gill slits. "Aquaren," Jake called softly, approaching her tank. "Can we talk?" She slowly rose to the surface, but her usual calm demeanor was gone. Her skin had changed from its normal gray-green to a darker, mottled pattern that Jake had never seen before. Stress hormones were clouding the water around her, making it harder to see her clearly. "Pick, my friend," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The fire currents bring only death tides to my people. Water and flame cannot exist in the same space. When fire comes, water dies, and with it all life that depends on the flowing streams." Jake knelt beside her tank, his mind racing as he tried to understand what was happening. "But Aquaren, the fire drill won't actually hurt the water systems. It's just a safety exercise." "The deep memories of my people remember the great drying," she continued, her voice taking on the rhythmic quality she used when sharing ancient Vorthan stories. "When fire spirits came from the sky and turned our ocean cities to steam. The fear flows through our bloodlines like a river that never stops running." She dove underwater again, releasing a cloud of stress chemicals that turned the water around her a murky brown color. Jake had never seen any of the Vorthan react this strongly to anything, not even when the station's water recycling system had broken down last month. Jake spent the rest of the day moving between the different sections, trying to calm everyone down and explain that the fire drill was just a safety requirement. But the more he talked to his alien colleagues, the more he realized how serious this problem was. Dr. Lisa Brooks found him in the main corridor that evening, looking exhausted and frustrated. Lisa was the station's chief psychologist, a small woman with kind eyes who specialized in interspecies relations. "Jake," she said, falling into step beside him, "I've been monitoring the psychological stress levels throughout the station today. The readings are off the charts for all 3 alien species." "I've been trying to reassure them all day," Jake said, rubbing his forehead, "but nothing I say seems to help." "They're genuinely terrified," Lisa nodded grimly. "I've been reviewing their species' evolutionary histories." Jake, fire represents something completely outside their experience. The Zephyrians evolved on a world where combustion is impossible due to their silicon-based chemistry. The Mallory come from deep underground cave systems where any fire would consume all available oxygen and kill everyone. And the Vorthan evolved in aquatic environments where fire simply cannot exist. "So what you're saying is," Jake said slowly, "this fire drill is like asking humans to practice for an alien invasion by monsters from our worst nightmares." "Exactly," Lisa said. "Except worse, because at least humans have cultural stories about monsters. These species have no cultural framework for understanding controlled fire at all. To them, fire equals death, period." They walked in silence for a moment, passing by viewing windows that showed the peaceful stars outside. Jake thought about his alien friends, all of them now hiding in their quarters, terrified of a safety drill that was meant to protect them. What happens if they can't participate in the drill? Jake asked. Lisa's expression grew more serious. "Galactic safety regulations are very strict. If a station can't complete required safety drills, it gets shut down. Everyone would be reassigned to different facilities, probably separated by species." Jake stopped walking and stared out at the stars. Kepler Research Station wasn't just a workplace for him and his colleagues. It had become a home, a place where 4 very different species had learned to live and work together despite their differences. The thought of losing. The morning of the fire drill arrived with a sense of dread hanging over Kepler Research Station like a dark cloud. Jake Morrison had barely slept the night before, worried about what would happen when the emergency alarm sounded. He had spent 2 days trying to prepare his alien colleagues, but their fear had only grown stronger with each passing hour. Commander Martinez gathered all the department heads in the main control room 30 minutes before the drill was scheduled to begin. The human crew members looked professional and ready, checking their tablets and reviewing evacuation routes one final time. But Jake could see the tension in everyone's faces. They all knew this wasn't going to be a normal drill. "Remember, this is a simulation," Commander Martinez said, her voice steady and calm. "We're testing our response to a fire in the main laboratory section. Simulated smoke will be released, emergency lighting will activate, and all crew members must evacuate to designated safe zones within 15 minutes. Jake looked at the security monitors showing different sections of the station. In the Zephyrian area, Nexus 7 and his companions had gathered in a tight cluster near their main workstation. Their crystal bodies were flickering between different colors so rapidly that they looked like broken light bulbs. The stress fractures in their transparent forms had grown worse over the past 2 days, creating spiderweb patterns across their arms and torsos. The Mallory section was even more chaotic. Instead of their usual organized groups, the insect aliens were scattered randomly throughout their area. Some were trying to hide under equipment tables, while others were scratching at the walls with their sharp claws, apparently trying to dig escape tunnels into the station's hull. The chemical scents of their panic were so strong that the air filtration systems couldn't keep up. In the Vorthan area, most of the aquatic aliens had sealed themselves inside their individual water tanks and refused to come out. Ekwaran was the only one still in the community pool, floating motionless near the bottom with her gills barely moving. The water around her was cloudy with stress hormones, making it look like chocolate milk. "All stations report ready," came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Peterson from the control center. "Beginning fire drill simulation in 10 seconds. Jake felt his heart rate increase as he watched the countdown on his tablet. 9 seconds. 8 seconds, 7 seconds. He found himself holding his breath as the final numbers ticked away. The alarm began with a low, urgent wail that echoed through every section of the station. Red emergency lights started flashing in the corridors, and the normal white lighting dimmed to create an atmosphere of crisis. Within moments, the first wisps of simulated smoke began seeping out of ventilation grates in the laboratory section. The alien response was immediate and devastating. On the security monitors, Jake watched in horror as Nexus 7 and the other Zephyrians simply stopped moving. Not slowed down, not hesitated, but stopped completely, like someone had pressed a pause button. Their crystal bodies went rigid, and their inner lights dimmed to barely visible glows. They had become living statues, frozen in place by terror so complete that their survival instincts had shut down all voluntary movement. "Nexus 7, respond please," Jake said into his communication device, but there was no answer. The Zephyrians couldn't hear him, couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the overwhelming fear that any motion in the presence of heat would shatter their crystalline forms into a million pieces. The Mallory section had erupted into complete chaos. The insect aliens were running in all directions at once, their usual hive mind coordination completely broken. Some were trying to climb the walls toward the ceiling, their claws scraping against metal as they sought higher ground. Others had formed defensive circles, standing back to back with their arms raised, as if preparing to fight invisible enemies. Jake could hear Klitsch's voice over the communication system, but she wasn't speaking in the organized way she usually did. Instead, she was making rapid clicking sounds mixed with chemical signals that created clouds of yellow and green smoke. The translation system couldn't keep up with the speed of her panic communication, producing only fragments of words like tunnel collapse and poison air and hive death. Several Mallory had started digging frantically at the floor with their claws, apparently trying to create underground escape routes. Metal shavings flew everywhere as they scratched and clawed at the station's hull, their survival instincts telling them that going deeper underground was the only way to escape the fire. Danger above, but the Vorthan reaction was perhaps the most heartbreaking of all. Instead of following the evacuation routes that led to the designated safe areas, they were all swimming frantically toward the station's water processing center. Their amphibious nature was driving them to seek the largest body of water available. Even though it was in the opposite direction from safety, Ekwaran had surfaced in her tank and was calling out in her liquid language, but her words were coming so fast that the translator could only catch pieces. "Deep currents failing," she was saying. "Fire spirits rising from the bottom. Must reach the great waters before the drying comes. Other Vorthen were abandoning their individual tanks and slithering through the corridors on their bellies, leaving trails of stress slime that made the floors slippery and dangerous. They were heading toward the water recycling plant, driven by instincts that told them the only safety lay in finding the deepest, coolest water possible. All evacuation teams. Report status. Commander Martinez's voice came over the speakers, but the reports coming back were not good. Zephyrian section non-responsive, came the first report. All personnel appear to be in some kind of paralysis state, unable to move them manually. Mallory section is in complete chaos, reported another team leader. Multiple injuries from clawing behavior. Several individuals have damaged station hull plating. Chemical atmosphere is toxic to human rescue personnel. Vorthen section abandoned, came a third report. All personnel have left their designated areas and are moving toward restricted sections of the station. Unable to redirect them, Jake grabbed his emergency kit and headed for the exit. Commander, I'm going to try to help them. Morrison, stay. At your post, Martinez ordered. This is still a drill, and we need to follow protocol. But Jake was already moving through the corridor, pushing past other crew members who were following proper evacuation procedures. The simulated smoke was getting thicker, and the flashing red lights made everything look like a scene from a nightmare. But what Jake saw when he reached the main intersection was even worse than the emergency lighting suggested. 3 Mallory were scratching desperately at a wall panel, their claws throwing sparks as they tried to dig through solid metal. One of them had torn open several conduits, causing real electrical problems that were making the lights flicker irregularly. Chemical panic signals filled the air so thickly that Jake had to pull his shirt over his mouth to breathe. Klitsch, Jake called out, trying to reach the Mallory leader. But she was in the middle of a cluster of her companions, all of them releasing panic chemicals and clicking in rapid, overlapping patterns. When Jake approached, several of the Mallory turned toward him with their arms raised defensively, their compound eyes reflecting the emergency lights like tiny mirrors. Jake backed away and headed toward the Zephyrian section. But the situation there was even more impossible. Nexus 7 and 4 other crystal beings were standing in the middle of their work area like transparent statues. Jake could see that they were still alive because their inner lights were still glowing faintly, but they were completely unresponsive to sound, touch, or movement around them. Nexus 7, it's me, Jake, he said, placing his hand gently on the alien's arm. The crystal felt cold and rigid, like touching a piece of glass sculpture. You need to move. We need to get to the safe area. But there was no response. The Zephyrian's eyes were open, but they stared straight ahead without seeing anything. Jake tried to physically guide Nexus 7 toward the exit, but the crystal being's body was completely rigid. It was like trying to move a statue that weighed several hundred pounds. The worst part was that Jake could see other Zephyrians scattered throughout their section, all frozen in whatever positions they had been in when the alarm sounded. One was reaching for a data tablet. Another was halfway through a doorway. A third was bent over a control panel. All of them were now living statues, trapped by their own terror. Jake's communication device crackled with more reports from the rescue teams, and none of them were good. The Vorthen had reached the water processing center and were trying to break into the main tanks. Several of them had injured themselves trying to force open sealed access panels. The Mallory had caused a small fire in their section by damaging electrical systems, which was making their panic even worse. All personnel, this drill is being terminated, Commander Martinez announced over the station's speakers. Repeat, this is not a drill termination. All human crew members continue evacuation. Procedures. Emergency medical teams to all alien sections immediately. But Jake knew that emergency medical teams wouldn't be able to help with this kind of panic. The alien crew members weren't injured in ways that human medicine could fix. They were trapped by evolutionary instincts that were millions of years old. Jake Morrison stood in the middle of the chaos, watching emergency teams struggle to help his alien friends. The red lights kept flashing, the alarms kept wailing, and nothing anyone was doing seemed to make the situation better. The Zephyrians were still frozen like statues, the Mallory were still scratching at the walls in panic, and the Vorthen were still trying to break into the water treatment center. Dr. Lisa Brooks ran up to Jake, her face pale with worry. "Jake, we've got real problems now. 3 Mallory have injured themselves badly enough to need medical treatment. The Zephyrians aren't responding to anything, and we can't even get close to the Vorthen because they're releasing so many stress chemicals that the air is toxic." Jake nodded, his mind racing as he tried to think of a solution. The emergency medical teams were trained to help with injuries and sickness, but they had no idea how to deal with this kind of panic. The alien crew members weren't hurt in their bodies. They were trapped by their own minds and millions of years of evolution. "We need to turn off the drill," Jake said. "Stop the alarms, clear the smoke, get everything back to normal." "We already tried that," Dr. Brooks replied. "Commander Martinez shut down the simulation 5 minutes ago. But the aliens are still in full panic mode. Their survival instincts don't have an off switch once they get activated." Jake looked around at the emergency crews trying to help, and suddenly he felt completely helpless. All of his training in interspecies relations hadn't prepared him for anything like this. He knew how to help the aliens work together on science projects and solve day-to-day problems. But this was something much bigger and more primitive than logic could reach. Then, in the middle of all the chaos and noise, a memory came to him from when he was 12 years old. He had been camping with his father in the mountains of Colorado, and it had started to rain hard during the night. Their campfire had gone out, and Jake's dad needed to start a new one to cook breakfast and dry their wet clothes, but his father hadn't just built a regular fire. Instead, he had dug a special hole in the ground and built what he called a Dakota fire pit. Jake remembered watching his dad carefully arrange rocks and create 2 connected holes that made the fire burn without producing any smoke at all. "It's an old Native American technique," his father had explained while they waited for their bacon to cook. "The secret is that you burn the fuel so completely that there's no smoke left over. The air comes in from below, gets superheated, and burns up all the particles that would normally make smoke." Jake remembered being amazed that you could have fire without smoke. It seemed like magic to his 12-year-old mind. His father had explained that soldiers used the same technique when they needed to cook food without giving away their position to enemies. Standing in the corridor of Kepler Research Station, surrounded by flashing lights and the sounds of alien panic, Jake suddenly realized that memory might be the key to solving their problem. "Lisa," he said, grabbing the psychologist's arm, "I need you to make an announcement to all the alien sections. Tell them that a human is going to demonstrate controlled fire technology. Make it sound like a science experiment, not an emergency procedure." Dr. Brooks looked confused. "Jake, what are you planning? We can't make the situation worse with actual fire." "Trust me," Jake said, already heading toward the station's maintenance section. "And tell Commander Martinez that I need access to the main assembly area. I'm going to show everyone that fire doesn't have to be dangerous." Jake ran through the station's corridors, his mind focused on the memory of that camping trip. He needed metal sheeting, ventilation components, and some kind of fuel source. The maintenance section had everything he was looking for, plus tools that would let him work much faster than his father had with just rocks and dirt. In the storage area, Jake gathered sheets of heat-resistant metal, flexible ducting from the air recycling systems, and several portable heating elements that were normally used to warm individual workstations. He also grabbed welding equipment and a portable cutting torch. The main assembly area was normally used for building large equipment that couldn't fit in the smaller workshop spaces. It had high ceilings, good ventilation, and enough room for all the crew members to gather safely. Jake started laying out his materials, his hands working automatically while his mind focused on remembering the exact design his father had shown him. The Dakota fire pit worked by creating 2 connected chambers underground. The main fire burned in the larger chamber, while a smaller tunnel brought fresh air in from the side. The incoming air got heated as it traveled toward the fire, and by the time it reached the flames, it was hot enough to burn up all the particles that would normally escape as smoke. Jake started cutting metal, sheeting into the shapes he needed. Instead of digging holes in the ground, he would build the chambers above ground using the station's materials. The heating elements would provide the initial fire, and the ventilation ducting would create the airflow system that made the whole thing work. As he worked, other crew members started gathering around the edges of the assembly area. Word had spread through the station that Jake was building something to help with the fire panic problem. Commander Martinez arrived with several other officers, looking skeptical but willing to let him try. "Morrison, what exactly are you doing?" the commander asked, watching Jake weld two pieces of metal together. "Building a demonstration fire that won't terrify our alien friends," Jake replied, not looking up from his work. "If I can show them that fire can be controlled and predictable, maybe their scientific curiosity will override their panic responses." Dr. Brooks had been working to calm the alien crew members, and Jake could hear her voice over the communication. "System, attention all stations. Human specialist Jake Morrison is constructing a controlled combustion demonstration in the main assembly area. This is not an emergency procedure, but rather a scientific exhibition of human fire control technology." Jake smiled as he worked. Lisa was smart to present it as a science experiment rather than a safety drill. The aliens might be too panicked to respond to emergency commands, but they were still scientists at heart. If they thought they were going to see new technology, their curiosity might be stronger than their fear. The design was coming together faster than Jake had expected. The station's advanced tools made it easy to cut precise shapes and weld clean joints. He built a rectangular main chamber about the size of a large toolbox, with a smaller intake chamber connected to it by a tunnel that sloped upward. The heating elements went into the main chamber, while the intake chamber connected to a series of ventilation ducts that would pull air from around the room. The key was getting the airflow exactly right. Too little air, and the fire would produce smoke. Too much air, and the flames would be too wild and chaotic. Jake adjusted the ventilation controls carefully, testing the airflow with strips of fabric that showed him which direction the air was moving. "Jake," Dr. Brooks called out, "Nexus 7 is starting to move a little bit. I think the Zephyrians are becoming curious about what you're building." That was encouraging news. If the crystal beings were starting to come out of their paralysis, it meant their scientific minds were beginning to overcome their survival instincts. Jake worked faster, knowing that he needed to have the demonstration ready before their curiosity faded and the panic took over again. The final step was connecting the control systems that would let him start and adjust the fire safely. Jake ran cables from the heating elements to a control panel he had assembled from spare parts. He could start the fire gradually, control the temperature precisely, and shut it down instantly if anything went wrong. "Attention all crew members," Commander Martinez announced over the speakers. "Please report to the main assembly area for a demonstration of human fire control technology. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Jake stepped back from his creation and wiped sweat from his forehead. The smokeless fire pit looked like a metal box with several tubes and cables attached to it, nothing like the simple hole in the ground his father had dug years ago. But the principles were exactly the same. Air would flow in through the intake system, get heated as it traveled through the connecting tunnel, and burn so completely in the main chamber that no smoke would escape. The assembly area started filling up with crew members. The human personnel looked curious and hopeful. But Jake's attention was focused on the aliens who were slowly, carefully making their way into the room. Nexus 7 entered first, moving with jerky, uncertain steps. His crystal form was still showing stress fractures, and his inner light was dim and flickering. But he was moving, which was a huge improvement from the complete paralysis of an hour ago. 3 Mallory came in together, staying close to each other and releasing nervous chemical signals. Their compound eyes darted around the room constantly, and their claws were extended as if they were ready to defend themselves. But they were there, which meant their curiosity was starting to win over their fear. Akoran arrived last, floating in a mobile water tank that 2 human crew members were pushing. The water around her was still cloudy with stress hormones, but her large dark eyes were focused on Jake's construction with obvious scientific interest. Jake looked around the room. At all. Jake Morrison's hand paused over the control panel as he looked around the room at all the faces watching him. The assembly area was completely quiet except for the soft humming of the station's life support systems. Everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen when he started the fire. Fire has been humanity's friend for over 1 million years, Jake said, his voice calm and steady. Long before we had spaceships or computers or even simple tools, humans learned how to control fire and make it work for us instead of against us. He slowly turned the first dial on his control panel. Deep inside the metal chambers he had built, the heating elements began to warm up. Nothing dramatic happened at first. Just a gentle red glow that was barely visible through the air intake vents. Nexus 7 moved closer, his crystal form still showing stress fractures but his inner light growing brighter with curiosity. Human. Jake Morrison, your device shows no visible combustion phenomena. How does this relate to the fire danger scenarios that caused our survival system failures? Watch and learn, my friend, Jake replied, adjusting the airflow controls. The ventilation system began pulling air into the intake chamber, and Jake could feel the flow of cool air being drawn into his device. As the heating elements got warmer, the air flowing over them began to heat up too. Jake had calculated the airflow rate carefully, making sure that by the time the air reached the main combustion chamber, it would be hot enough to burn cleanly and completely. The secret, Jake explained while he worked, is that most of what people think of as fire is actually just unburned fuel escaping into the air. Smoke, sparks, and dangerous heat happen when the fire doesn't have enough air or when the air isn't hot enough to burn everything completely. The 3 Maulery had moved closer together, their chemical communications creating a sweet smell that Jake's translator indicated was curiosity mixed with caution. Klitsch spoke for her cluster mates, her voice still carrying traces of nervous. Clicking, Human Jake Morrison, your explanation suggests that fire danger can be controlled through engineering solutions. The hive mind finds this concept difficult to process. Our ancestral memories contain only images of uncontrolled combustion leading to tunnel system destruction. Jake nodded understandingly while he continued adjusting his controls. The air inside his device was getting hot enough now that he could start the actual combustion process. He turned another dial, and a small amount of fuel began flowing into the main chamber. The moment the fuel met the superheated air, it ignited with a soft whoosh sound. But instead of the wild, unpredictable flames that the aliens had imagined, during the fire drill, what appeared in Jake's device was a steady, controlled burn that produced almost no visible flame and absolutely no smoke. Aquaren rose to the surface of her mobile tank, her large dark eyes wide with amazement. Jake, my friend, the fire currents flow in perfect harmony within your creation. There are no chaotic energies, no dangerous heat storms. How do you make the flame spirits behave so peacefully? It's all about giving the fire exactly what it needs, Jake explained, pointing to the different parts of his device. Enough air, the right temperature, and complete combustion. When fire gets everything it needs, it doesn't create smoke or dangerous heat because there's nothing left over to escape. Jake adjusted the controls to increase the heat output slightly. The fire inside his device burned brighter, but it remained completely contained within the metal chambers. The only signs that anything was burning were the gentle warmth radiating from the main chamber and the soft sound of air flowing through the intake system. Commander Martinez had been watching from the back of the room, and now she stepped forward with obvious interest. Morrison, this is impressive work. How hot is the combustion chamber getting? Jake checked the temperature readings on his control panel. About 800 degrees Celsius in the main chamber, but the external temperature is only slightly above room temperature. The double-wall design and controlled airflow keep all the heat contained where it's supposed to be. Nexus 7 moved even closer, his scientific curiosity now completely overriding his earlier terror. Human Jake Morrison, may I examine the thermal distribution patterns of your device? The Zephyrian sensors detect highly organized energy flows that do not match our previous understanding of combustion processes. Of course, Jake said, stepping aside so the crystal being could take readings with his natural sensors. The whole point is to make fire predictable and safe. No surprises, no chaos, just controlled energy release. As Nexus 7 took his measurements, the stress fractures in his crystal form began to fade. His inner light was returning to its normal blue-green color, and his movements were becoming smooth and graceful again. Jake could see that understanding the science behind controlled fire was helping the Zephyrian overcome his instinctive terror. The Mallory were having a similar reaction. They had formed a semicircle around Jake's device and were taking detailed chemical readings of the air around it. Their earlier panic signals had been replaced by the complex sense that indicated intense scientific analysis. The combustion process produces no toxic airborne particles, Klitsch reported to her clustermates. A chemical signature indicates complete fuel consumption with minimal waste products. This contradicts all Hive memory data about fire danger scenarios. That's because your ancestors only encountered uncontrolled fires, Jake explained. Wildfires, accidental fires, fires started by lightning or volcanic activity. They never saw fire that was designed and managed by intelligent beings. Jake turned to address the whole room, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had found the right solution to a difficult problem. Every human child learns about fire safety, not because we're not afraid of fire, but because we've learned how to make fire work for us. We use it to cook food, heat our homes, power our machines, and even launch our spaceships into orbit. He gestured toward his smokeless fire pit, which continued to burn steadily and safely. The same fire that could destroy a forest can also warm a home, cook a meal, or provide light in the darkness. The difference is understanding and control. Dr. Brooks had been taking notes throughout the demonstration, and now she stepped forward with obvious excitement. Jake, this is brilliant. You've turned their greatest fear into a scientific learning opportunity. Look at them, they're not afraid anymore, they're fascinated. She was right. All three alien species were now crowding around Jake's device, taking measurements and asking technical questions. Their earlier panic had been completely replaced by scientific curiosity and wonder. Aquaren spoke from her tank, her voice carrying the lyrical quality she used when she was particularly interested in something. Jake, my friend, you have shown us that the fire spirits can be gentle teachers instead of destroying demons. Will you share the ancient wisdom that your people used to first tame these flame currents? Jake smiled and began explaining the history of human fire use, starting with the first controlled fires made by early humans and working his way up to modern combustion engines and rocket propulsion. As he talked, he could see the aliens beginning to understand that fire wasn't just a natural disaster to be feared, but a fundamental tool that had shaped human civilization. So when we have fire drills, Jake continued, we're not practicing how to run away from fire. We're practicing how to manage fire emergencies safely and efficiently. We assume that fire will be part of our lives, so we learn how to deal with it properly. Commander Martinez stepped forward again, this time with a broad smile on her face. Morrison, I'm officially adopting your fire management demonstration as part of our standard safety training. All future fire drills will begin with a controlled fire demonstration to help our alien crew members understand what they're practicing for. The suggestion was met with enthusiastic agreement from all the alien species. Nexus 7's inner light was now pulsing with excitement rather than fear. The Zephyrian Science Council would be honored to study human fire control technologies. Perhaps we can contribute our knowledge of precise temperature regulation to improve your designs. Klitsch and her Mallory clustermates were releasing pleasant chemical signals that filled the air with scents like flowers and fresh bread. The hive mind wishes to learn more about coordinated fire management. Our tunnel building expertise might help improve airflow designs for controlled combustion systems. Aquaren was floating near the top of her tank, her skin now its normal, healthy gray-green color. The Vorthan Flowmasters would like to study how air currents can be directed to control flame behavior. Perhaps we can share our knowledge of fluid dynamics to help perfect these systems. Jake looked around the room at all his friends and colleagues, no longer panicking but instead working together to understand and improve his simple fire demonstration. The smokeless fire pit continued to burn steadily in the center of the room, its controlled flames serving as a symbol of how cooperation and understanding could overcome even the deepest fears. "You know what this means?" Dr. Brooks said quietly to Jake as the various species continued their scientific discussions around his device. "What?" Jake asked. "We can finally have a proper fire drill," she replied with a grin. "And maybe even a barbecue party in the main dining hall."